continue the conversation and continue highlighting the importance of addressing one of the failures, frankly, of the United States government, which is the separation of children from their parents, and in many cases the forcible separation of children from their parents. So I am joined by Senator Cortez Masto and Senator Merkley and a representative of Kids in Need of Defense Kind to talk about a bill that we are proposing that is called the Reunite Act, which is designed and intended to create a law that will exist permanently to ensure that never again will the United States government have the ability or the power to separate children from their parents in the way that has been done. So let's talk about the facts and where we are right now. There are still, as of today, nearly 2,600 children who are separated from their parents, who have been torn from their parents. And it is clear when the administration created this no-tolerance policy that there was never the intention and certainly the design of any system to reunify these children with their parents. And so what we have seen over the ensuing weeks is complete pandemonium. We have seen the trauma that these children are experiencing, trauma that extends to not only their emotional state, but in many cases their physical state. Experts, pediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists are talking about the fact that this trauma in many of these cases will probably be lifelong in terms of its impact. And we have seen similar trauma for these parents, many of whom didn't know at the time that their children were taken from them that it would be anything permanent. Many of these parents who still don't know exactly where their children are. And other parents who have been denied the ability to have any consistent contact with their children. And let's be clear about what this is. For any parent or anyone who has parented a child, knowing that your child goes to sleep at night, not hearing their parent's voice telling them they love you, for that child who cannot go to sleep at night having been read a bedtime story by their parent, all because of a policy that was created by an administration to punish and penalize these parents as a supposed disincentive to immigration. It is not reflective of the ideals of who we are as a country. It is not reflective of a civil society, and it's got to stop. And so this bill is designed to address that. Weeks ago in California, I visited the Otay Mesa Detention Center. There I met with mothers who had been separated from their children. And they told me stories that were not only the stories of the violence that they fled in Honduras and El Salvador, not only stories about the trauma of the trip and the passage through another country, the entire country of Mexico, to reach our border, but then they told me of being separated from their children, not knowing why, not knowing when they would see those children again, and they told me of the conditions in the detention center which I saw, a detention center that looked exactly like every prison I've ever visited when I was a prosecutor. They told me the stories of how they were not allowed to phone their children with any consistency, and they were charged for those phone calls, contrary to what the folks who are running that prison told me. People, by the way, who do not work, the people who run that prison, who do not work directly for DHS or ICE, but instead are contract workers, who clearly have no sense of responsibility to carry out what should be the role of the United States government, which again is to try and reunify parents with their children instead of separating them. So there's a stunning lack of transparency and accountability in this process as well, both in how it has played out and also the intentions of the administration as we go forward in terms of how they exactly plan to reunify these children. In connection with my position on the Department of Homeland Security Committee, HSGAC, I've asked for over a year then Secretary Kelly, Acting Secretary Duke, current Secretary Nielsen, and others in a position of authority. What is the policy? What are the protocols? What are the training methods that are being employed by this agency to determine how to, in a least traumatic way, separate the children, if that must be done? And what is the plan? What is the protocol And where is it in terms of how you plan to reunify these children with their parents? What is the time period during which there is a decision that that reunification must happen? What is the process of determining how that reunification will take place? And we've still not received any response. I've asked this administration, through those individuals and others, you say that in some of these cases you're separating those children from their parents because you're concerned that that adult may be a trafficker. So I have asked, show us the cases where you have referred any one of these adults who have brought these children across the border, where any one, not one case, where you have referred that to the Department of Justice for prosecution for trafficking, and they've given us no response. It's extremely lacking, and it is frankly abhorrible, and I would suggest a human rights violation that is being committed by the United States government against these families. And we are better than this. So the Reunite Act is designed to address that, and it comes on the heels of another act that I've been privileged to propose with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and that's the Dunn Act, where we are proposing putting moratorium on expansion of any new detention facilities by ICE. We are proposing an increase of the oversight of ICE facilities so we can see what's going on there. We are hearing countless cases of abuses occurring, in particular around these women who are there and even pregnant women. And that the Dunn Act also proposes that we reduce the detention beds by 50% through a more successful and less costly alternative to detention, which is something that was in place before this administration came into being. And today, then, the Reunite Act. So working with Senators Merkley and Cortez Masto, this act is designed to reunify the thousands of children who remain separated from their parents and, again, protect any families in the future who may be subject to this kind of policy. Specifically, the Reunite Act requires immediate reunification of these children with their parents. It requires a sustained and no-cost contact policy, no-cost contact policy between the parents and the children. So that's about the fact that in many of these cases, the parents have to pay to actually be reunified with their children and all that that requires, meaning they have to pay for the transportation to get back to their children or for their children to be rejoined with them. They have to pay for the phone calls, things of that nature. And so this act would require that, of course, they would not have to pay for something that was not of their own doing. It would also require access to legal counsel and child advocates, because currently there is not a requirement that the parents and children have those advocates and have lawyers. And so we are forcing these families to navigate this very difficult and opaque system on their own. It will also require unannounced inspections by child welfare organizations so that we can monitor the conditions of these facilities and the circumstances of these children and their parents. And then, finally, it will establish an office for locating and reuniting children with their parents, which will be an interagency collaboration between DOJ, DHS, and HHS. And I want to thank Senator Merkley for the work you have done in that regard. And finally, it'll ensure that families will not be reunified in jail. So the administration has made all of this noise about how they're going to try and reunify these families, but it is apparent that where and if they intend to do that, it is the intention that it will happen in a jail, in one of these facilities, in one of these caged facilities. And we would argue that it is probably not only inhumane, but also not effective and efficient for the government to spend the kind of money that is required to do that, when it has been proven that there are less restrictive settings that have resulted in 99% of the parents with their children showing up for future court appearances. And so finally, again, I'll say, we are better than this. We as a country are better than this, and we should not be playing politics with the lives of these children, these young children and their families, and it's got to stop, and it's got to stop today. So with that, I am pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Senator Merkley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Harris, and I'm pleased to join with her and Senator Cortez Masto today to introduce this act. When the administration decided to develop a strategy to deter individuals from seeking asylum when they were fleeing persecution, they went to a very dark and evil place by choosing a strategy deliberately designed to inflict trauma on children. This is not supportable under any moral code. This would not be endorsed by any religious tradition. It has to end immediately. We have to restore these children to their families, and we have to make sure it never happens again. And that's what this act is all about. Let's think about 3 different children. 6-year-old Allison, who we heard pleading on a tape with no pictures, pleading to be placed with her aunt or be able to call her aunt after she was torn out of the arms of her mother at the border. And then we later saw the joyful reunification with her mother, Cindy. Or how about 1-year-old Mateo, which was a different picture because he had been separated for 8 months, and when he was reunited with his father, Jose, did not recognize his father, and his family went on to say that now he is very fearful. When he sees strangers, he thinks they're going to take him. He just grabs me. That's what his mother said about him. Huge trauma inflicted on children. That's what this is about, and that's what this is ending. I want to tell you a story of a 3rd child, Andrea. Her mother fled Honduras after her life was threatened because her family couldn't repay a loan. She was 8 months pregnant. She proceeded to make it through Honduras, make it through Guatemala, make it through Mexico, arrive at a port of entry, and this is the Hidalgo McAllen port of entry, and she crossed that passenger bridge, and she was rebuffed by our border guards time after time after time because they weren't letting anyone through to seek asylum, only people with passports and visas. And I saw those border guards out there with a delegation of other congressional members stopping individuals as they came to that line in the middle of the bridge, sending them back to the Mexico side where they're extremely vulnerable. When we came off the bridge, when the congressional delegation came off the bridge and went through the doors of the port of entry, there were empty counseling rooms. They said, "Oh, we're overwhelmed, we have no space," but empty counseling rooms. They did have one holding room with 10 or 12 people in it. And I asked, is anyone in that room seeking asylum? Did they make it across this pedestrian bridge? They said, yes, we have a family. And so we asked to meet that family. And out came a mother carrying her 65-day-old child, Andrea, beautiful little baby girl. And she told me, I thought they'd made exception for her because she had a 2-month-old. They said, no, she said, I was sent back time and time again. I said, how did you get across the United States of America? And at that moment, she got a big smile on her face. She said, I was sent back so many times, I was desperate to come across. And then I saw there's a passenger bridge, or not a passenger, a pedestrian bridge, and there is a car bridge. And out on the car bridge, multi-laned car and truck bridge, there were people washing windows. So I went up. I borrowed a squeegee, and I washed the first car, and I washed the next car, and worked my way all the way to the American side. That's how she got in. Now, there's a couple important things to note in this story. The first is the administration said there's no reason for anyone to cross between ports of entry because they can cross legally at a port of entry and assert asylum. That is a lie if they are blocking people crossing at the port of entry. A second is that when I saw that mother with her little girl having gone through so much trauma in her home country, so much trauma on the road, finally made it here, in my head was the fact in a few hours later she might be separated from that little girl. We're not sure what happened to her. But here's what we do know. Under the new policy put forward by Jeff Sessions, because she was a victim of a neighborhood controlled by a gang, a criminal enterprise, rather than by a technical government, she will not qualify. And what awaits her? This treatment of children, enormously horrific. And people say, well, the administration has this new plan. They want to go from family separation to family incarceration. They want to set up internment camps. That is not going to happen. We will be on the war path here in Congress against any effort to legalize internment camps in the United States of America. It's exactly what the president asked for in his executive order. He asked Congress to act to make this possible. Well, we will not. We will fight this with everything we have. And then people say, well, if not family separation, if not incarceration, what do you propose? Well, we propose what's in this bill, Family Case Management Program. This is a copy of the Inspector General's report on the Family Case Management Program. And what does it say? Of course, this is a program that proceeds to provide someone to check in routinely on families, to make sure they speak their language, write their language, can notify them against about every upcoming check-in, about every hearing. So I was curious to find out, how did it work? This is the program that the administration shut down a year ago. Well, the Inspector General for Homeland Security tells us on page 5. It says, according to ICE, overall program compliance for all 5 regions is an average of 99% for ICE check-ins and appointments. When do you get a program that's 99% effective? This is for check-ins. It goes on, as well as 100% attendance at court hearings. This case management is a respectful, dignified treatment, keeping families together, and they show up for their hearings. And this bill backs saying that we will treat families with respect and dignity. Never are we going to tolerate inflicting trauma on children and trauma on parents as a strategy as this administration concocted. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just say I am pleased and honored to join my colleagues, Senator Harris and Senator Merkley, in introducing the Reunite Act. I don't have to tell all of you, this crisis that we are in was completely manufactured by this administration. Completely manufactured. We are here today because this administration put in an inhumane policy thinking it was okay for deterrent purposes to separate parents from their children, from toddlers. It is outrageous. As Americans, what we value in this country are our families and our kids, and always looking out for the best interests of our kids and doing them no harm. And I'll tell you what, I don't care whether you are from the United States, or you're from Nicaragua, Honduras, or what country you are from, we should all be looking out for the best interests of children and their families. And my stories are no different. I went down to the border. I wanted to see for myself not only how this administration was using our taxpayer dollars to house these children and their families. And when I showed up at one of the facilities that was housing the toddlers, Casa Presidente, they would not let me in. Not only did they have a locked door, they even refused to sit down and just talk to me about how they were treating the children and the accommodations for the children and how long they had been there and the ages of the children, the gender of the children, and what we were doing in the future to look out for the best interests. To me, outrageous. Outrageous. And then I went to Isabel Detention Facility to talk to the parents. And Senator Harris is right. And we both know, as former attorneys general, I've been to the prisons in the state of Nevada. And this Isabel Detention Facility is no different than the prisons I visited as the attorney general in the state of Nevada. These parents are being detained in prison. They have no idea what's happening to their children. I talked with 6 mothers, 4 fathers, and each one of them told me the same thing. They asked me where their child is, and they asked me what was going on in the outside world and how long they were going to be there. Because what they told me is they have access to one TV, and anytime the news comes on about family detention or what's happening at the border, the channel is changed. They are put in coveralls, colored coveralls. They're told when to eat, when they can go out in the yard and get some fresh air. And then they're back in their cells or some sort of detained facility and have no idea what's happening. And each one of them had the same story. And I will tell you, I don't know how you could not sit and listen to the stories that these mothers and fathers said with tears in their eyes and not be outraged by what this administration has done. They've come from foreign countries because they are not safe where they are. Who wouldn't pick up their child and take them to a country that is known for protecting others? Who wouldn't? Anna had a 5-year-old daughter, and she did that because her daughter was being threatened, and she was being threatened with her life. And so she made the decision to leave her home country, her own country, her language that she knows, her country that she grew up in. Who wants to do that? But she had to be for the safety of her family. And she trekked across 3,000 miles of dangerous terrain and difficult terrain to get to our border, knowing what she had been told, that Americans will protect you. Americans will be there to fight for you. And when she saw the Border Patrol, she thought, my God, I finally made it. I'm here. And she waved them down, thinking, with my daughter, we are going to be protected. And what do? They lock her up. They lock her up. And then they tell her, you need to take your 5-year-old daughter and you need to either put her on that bus or we will do it for you. But we're taking your child away from you. And that was the first time she and her daughter had ever been separated. And every single story that I heard from those parents was the same. Griselda did the same thing with her family. She had a small business. And they were extorting her for money. And if you don't pay those gangs and the criminals the money, then they threaten you with your life or your children's life, or your daughter can be raped and killed. And so she came to this country for that protection, to protect her family. And I said to every single one of these parents, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you go to the police for protection? And they looked at me and said, the police are part of the problem. There is no rule of law. There is nobody there to protect us. But we know and we've heard that Americans do just that. And that's why we're here. It is outrageous. And I don't care whether you're a parent, you're not a parent. This is not who we are as a country. But this policy, and let's be clear, this policy was dreamed up by this administration. They never, ever had an intent to reunite these children with their parents. Never. Never had an intent. And believe me, I've talked with them. It's not in their policies or protocols. They've never had to do it before, so they've never done it. And that's what's happening here. And what you have are various agencies, whether it's Border Patrol or ICE or Homeland Security, which oversees those two, and HHS, which oversees the Refugee Resettlement Program. They're not communicating. They don't share information. When the families come in, they give them an alien ID number, and that's it. They don't say who they're connected to, if their parents came with them. They don't say where they're from, other than you've got an alien ID number, and now we're going to sort you like your cattle, based on your gender, based on your age. I went to the processing center where they're actually keeping these families and some kids in these, I don't know how else to say it, but it looked like these little cells that were put together by chain link fence. And they sorted them based on their age and their gender. It was outrageous. And I went to talk to two mothers who had just come here. You could tell they still had the clothes that they came over in. They had not been able to take showers. And they were standing in front of young toddlers who were sitting on a mat behind them. And I assumed those were their kids. And I said, oh my goodness, when did you come? What's going on? How long have you been here? And how long have your kids been there? And they said, oh, these aren't our kids. Our boys, who are their teenagers, they're housed right over there in another facility, and we can't see them. They're in the same building, but we can't see them because they are separating them based on their age and gender. Can you imagine? Your child is there, but you don't get the opportunity to even see or talk to that child. It's outrageous. So we need policies. We need to continue to fight for these families. I told those parents I would tell their stories and bring them here, and that people in this country are fighting for them, and that's what this is about. We do not stop fighting because this is about our values. who we are as Americans and what we project around the world. That when people are in need and there is threat and they're being persecuted or there's threat of violence against them, that we will help them. And that's what this is about. So thank you so much to my colleagues and all of you for caring enough to be here today and continuing to tell this story and fight with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Harris, Merkley, and Cortez Masto, for your incredible leadership in introducing this critical legislation, the Reunite Act, which would